on, y'all? We are here for another new Flashback Sessions. Here with Short Fuze, of course. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. It's been a while
I know.
since we did this, so we really got to get back. Make sure we give these guys quality content.
Back on the schedule, back on what we're doing here, man. But yeah, so today's episode is going to be about this album here, which is Mr. Len's Pity the Fool. Which came out in 1999 on Matador Records, was recorded at Ozone. I think mostly by me. We'll get into that a little bit later. But before we even get into that, first of all, I'm going to do some self-promo. I got my shirts in yesterday. Only Child official. Uncommon
Those are
Nasty
dope,
Tee.
man.
Little ringer. First ringer tees that we did at this label. So that's not really a milestone, but it's a thing. I guess I'll start with a couple of like Len stories when I first met Mr. Len. If that makes sense. And then we'll get into sort of like your discovery of the album recently.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go
Oh,
forward,
true. Yeah, we should go back. Yes.
we just got a couple housekeeping things.
Mhm.
I know you said you had a correction.
Yeah, my only correction from the last episode we did, which you can see here, I'll put the link here in post, was the making of Infesticons, which was Mike Ladd's album, production album for Big Dada and Ninja Tune. And the only correction I have that I can remember now that I edited that so long ago is a lot of times I referred to myself as 2021, 2021. When I went back and did actual math, I realized I was 19 for most of that recording, if not all of that recording. So just for proper context, like anyone that's been 19 knows how different 19 and 21 is, even though it's only 2 years. Those are big 2 years at that time. So imagine all those stories with me as a 19-year-old NASA, which is kind of amazing for me to think about because that was so long ago.
Yeah, that is crazy, man.
So long ago. But yeah, that's my only
And then,
correction for that record, for that release.
Yeah,
that I
we
can
did pretty
remember.
good on that one, I think. And then, as is tradition, I got to ask you, what's your favorite joint on that record?
Man, it's really hard to choose a favorite joint on that record. There are a lot of like incredible moments on there. I would say there's probably 4 or 5 if I consider the recording experience, but if I'm speaking strictly as a listener now, I'm still gonna hold it to 2. I'm gonna still tie it at Cave Theme with BMS, and Chase Theme with Rob Sonic. Off the top
Okay.
of my head, without looking at the track list, those are the 2 that come to mind. But I love that whole album. Obviously, we talked about it for
Yeah.
45 some odd minutes about a month ago, and again, like monkey theme, figurine theme, passer theme, like the recording memories of those tracks are so really like super high, so that they have a special place for me too.
That's cool. Now I'm gonna agree with you on those two joints. Those stand out the most to me, and they just fit so well conceptually within that record. Those are that. I mean, there's, like you said, there's so many standouts on that album. It's hard to just narrow it down to like 1 or 2. But gun to head, no pun intended. Those are the 2 that I agree with you, especially knowing what those individuals would do later on. So
True. Yeah, I mean, I think it brings us in pretty nicely. This is now the current episode that we're doing is another production record. And it was another record that was recorded, at least mostly, or at least my experience in it was recorded at Ozone. We are eventually going to move into some Def Jux stuff. Don't worry. But I wanted to make sure that we gave proper credit to Ozone and those experiences. And we may go to Def Jux stuff and then come back to Ozone stuff as we decide what we want to talk about. So
no, but I think it's important to lay the groundwork,
mm-hmm.
not only from your own personal experience being involved with this scene so early on, but also just from a even from a music standpoint, without Ozone, there would be no Def Jux. So
Absolutely.
it's important to highlight um, these moments because uh, us as fans, and even myself, I've been guilty of it. Sometimes we all kind of lump that era into the previous era, and it's like it's like one. Sometimes we think about it as like one continuous moment, and it's not. That's not really how it went down. There was a lot of things that happened before it to get to that point where it became this like apex moment. So I think it's important to highlight these albums and you know uh stress the importance of them being building blocks for what came after it. So
Yeah, and I think even for me personally, you know, a lot of people that are familiar with my engineer part of my career, associate me with Def Jux, and that's well and good. But I didn't, just fall from the sky and land there. Like the reason that I was brought there and when Ozone folded was because what they wanted me to do at Def Jux was exactly what I had been doing. Recording and working with artists and all that kind of stuff. And even though I was very young, and relatively unknown in the Ozone days, they knew, when they brought me to Jux that I had worked on records like this, obviously with L in the past. So, it all made sense, and I haven't even really thought about that until recently, where I'm like, huh, well, that's why, like, I was never particularly intimidated by that point because I had already gone through that period, like
right.
I'll even get into some of that on this episode. I had already gone through some of that, at Ozone, where you're going through that starstruck phase. Um, so um, I guess I'll start with a quick, like I said, I'll start with a three quick, like, just Len interaction stories. First of all, like, Len is one of the nicest dudes I ever worked with. Len was super cool, super chill, super talented, both at beat making and at DJing. One of the most fun guys to have in the studio. One of the more creative, like, cutters, like, in terms of, like, not just the way that he did it, and I'll get into a little bit of that later, but like the stuff that he chose. Um, you know, Len's balance of like seriousness and comedy is sort of on full display on this record, but that was who he is. There will be many times during flashback sessions that I refer to people as was. I want to clarify, unless otherwise noted, everyone is still doing well and running around the world. But when you're talking about, myself 20 years ago, these folks 20 years ago, there is sort of a was, because it's like anyone that's been around for, like, walking around for 40 years knows how different your life is. So but he was always really funny at the in sessions, and naturally, not like anyway, but really easy to work with. But the first time I ever met Mr. Len, he didn't know me and I didn't know him, and I remember it was way earlier. It was probably like 1997, maybe early 97, maybe even late 96. And the indie scene in hip hop had first started. And I was at the old Fat Beats. So the Fat Beats that was on East 3rd, when you went down into the basement stairs before they moved over to 6th Avenue and 8th Street. And I just remember being like obsessed with Company Flow at that age. I was in 96, I was just graduating high school, and it was pretty incredible to hear, like, the original Funk Crusher EP at the time. And I knew it existed on vinyl from Stretch and Bobbito's show, and it was sold out everywhere. And I went to Fat Beats hoping that they would have a copy, and they didn't. And I remember asking, might have been Eclipse, it could have been anybody else that was working the counter about it. And Len was standing right next to me when I asked, and I didn't even know what any of the three of them looked like at the time because this is pre-internet and pre-Herb article, and that was the Herb article was the first time you saw what Company Flow looked like, at least that I can remember. And so he was like, "Yo, we're pressing up more. We sold all of them like really quicker than we thought. So it's something like that, and so we'll have more though, And I was like, word. And I left, and I walked out, and I was like, I wasn't clear because I didn't know what they looked like. Like I was like, wait, was that one of the guys from the group? And then like years later, when I met Len, I was like, oh shit, that was the dude that told me that in the record store like years earlier. Shows how small like New York scene was then, and like how anonymous you could be. And that kind of brings me to like a couple other quick interactions that I had with him. Like when I first met Len, I kind of hinted at this when we talked about patriotism in the first episode of the show. Me and Len would like go get lunch or whatever. And I can remember going to like the New York staple of the time, which was Ranch One. New Yorkers from the 90s will remember the Ranch One chain. It's like a chicken sandwich chain. It was right downstairs at Ozone. And we go downstairs and like walked out, and Len was like, that kid was kind of weird. And I was like, I don't know, maybe he recognized you. And like, I'm 19, and in my world, like Company Flow is like the biggest thing ever, like
Right.
and they were large, but this was probably even before End to End Burners had made it into like semi MTV rotation, and he just looked at me like I was fucking insane to even suggest such a thing, which maybe he did. I don't know, you know what I mean? And then the other thing I remember of the early times before this album was I remember in passing just talking about Lil Johnny from the Hospital. And I didn't realize at the time that he had produced like 4 full songs, like split production on 2 others. So basically
Yeah.
produced or co-produced like 6 songs off the record. And I don't remember what I said exactly, but I said something in passing of like, indicating that I didn't think that he had produced anything on it. And I think I think it bothered him. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it was almost like one of those like, this isn't your fault, but that was stupid. You know what I mean? And I learned like quickly at that point to like not goober out. You know what I mean? Like I talked a lot in like other flashback sessions about staying in the pocket and like, you know what I mean? Like not sweating musicians and shit. And like the more that you say to people that you're a fan of, the more chance you have of like saying something stupid. So lesson learned there. And my 25-year apology to Mr. Len.
Yeah, that's one thing that I always try and clear up to people, especially particularly with Little Johnny, is there's this big misconception that L did it all. Because even I was guilty of that early on, because back then that he was the guy. So
Right.
so when you learn like, oh, they split a lot of the production, and Len did a lot of some of the stuff himself. It's like, oh shit. So incidentally, Shadows Drown is one of my favorite joints
Yeah.
on that
Yeah.
record.
It
So
is.
because it is, even though it's in the vein of the rest of the album, it's something different when it comes along. So that's why it always stood out to me. But yeah, for people that don't know, LP did not do all of Little Johnny from the Hospital by himself.
Yeah, it seems crazy that we would still need to correct that this many years later, but you never know. I'm sure there are people that don't get that. I certainly didn't at the time, but talk a little bit about I had this copy from back then. It actually still has a cellophane on it and it's open, which I used to like to do, and now it kind of annoys me. So maybe I'll tear this up. But it's got the promo stickers, so I don't want to lose that. I'm nerding out. But yeah, like you just got your copy recently, right?
Yeah, so this album, me personally, I always tried to stay on top of everything from that era as best I could, in real time. But admittedly, this was an album that I didn't know about until years later. Um, s- I what was it was probably 2014 or 15 when I came out to
Mm,
do Autonomy, to record Autonomy.
right.
We were taking a break, and I don't know how it came up, to be honest, but we started talking about Jean Grae, and then you were like, "Have you ever heard Taco Day?" I was like, "What the fuck is that?" And you're like, "You never heard Taco Day?" And like, you literally dropped what you were doing and you pulled that record out, and you're like, "You got to hear this joint." So I was like, "Oh shit, that joint is fucking crazy." Um, I don't know how I never heard it. I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I hadn't heard it up until that point. But the minute that I left New York, I downloaded that album off of iTunes, and that I played it, for days and days and days, because
Wow.
it's such a departure from the company flow sound. And he kind of, like, I don't know if it was a conscious effort, but he kind of lulls you with that first joint that opens the album because it's super grimy.
The
And
This
then,
morning with the Juggaknots.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden he starts to the change the paces with each song.
Yeah.
So he did a really good job of fitting a particular sound with each artist. It's almost like he tailored those specific sounds for that artist specifically, which not a lot of producers do. Some producers, I mean,
Hmm.
yourself being a producer, some producers would be like, "This is my sound. If you want to rap on this, this is what you got to do." And the good producers will always tailor their sound to the specific artist they're working with. So even you specifically, you have a specific sound, but my beats don't sound like Last Sun's beats, and Guillotine beats don't sound like anything else
Hmm.
that we've done before, which people will know soon. But going forward, so I think that's really cool that he opened with somebody that was obviously very huge at that time, Juggaknots. Um, Shout out to those legends. And then he just goes in, and the pace just changes consistently from the second song on.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think, for me, when I listen back to this record, I've actually listened to it a bunch lately in preparation for this. And I pulled out the vinyl and I listened to it on Spotify a bunch of times too. Um, and what I've always thought about Len's sound is like there's one thing that is a similarity to like what Len did then and what L did then is they both did a lot of sample and pitching. So there's a lot of slow down stuff and
mhm.
it gives it that sort of haunting vibe to both of their beats. But the main difference is drum sources and sort of sample sources in general. Like I think Len's sample choices are a lot more funky and soulful.
Yeah, and
But
I
he's
think,
using similar techniques, not the same technique, but I don't even know. I think I think Len was using an MPC 2000. I could be wrong, but I think that he was, and that's obviously a drastically different instrument than what L was using, which was an ASR 10. Before that was a EPS 16. So, um, you know, but that would be the only similarity that I could even find. You know what I mean? And obviously, being in the same crew and working together, you're gonna have
for
those.
sure.
But I feel like like Len's production on this record, like it is sort of a good telling of like who he was at the time in terms of making music. He was a guy who was gonna give you beats like The Hurt or like This Morning or like Love Venom or Taco Day, but he was also going to be able to give you like Get Loose, and what's the D-Stroy, Bring It To Me, like those kinds of beats,
Right.
Family Matters, like Dummy Smacks, like those sorts of like, more, boppy, like, but everything on here is hard, like
It
it
is.
hits.
But I just wanted to highlight that because that speaks to his experience as a DJ and his ear as a DJ.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think uh that's where the difference comes in because um when you're a DJ, you hear music a little bit differently because you're trying to get a crowd moving. So I think that that that
Yeah.
that ear spills over into the production. So do you I don't know if you can answer this question, but maybe we can just at least try and guess. Um, do you think it was a purposeful move for him to kind of give people something different to kind of separate himself from the quote unquote company flow sound on purpose, or do you think it was something that was a natural progression maybe?
Um, I think my personal opinion is that Len has always had his own sound, even within Company Flow. I don't think he got to show like what his production style was until this record, you know.
Right.
But I think this was always what he would have done had he been given the opportunity to do it earlier. So in some ways the answer is yes, and in other ways the answer is you know NA, not applicable. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I don't think that he, in other words, I don't think that post Little Johnny that he distinctly went one way or another way on purpose. I think that, in my opinion, he made the record that he would have made had he not been making Little Johnny a year earlier and not been making Fun Crush a year and a half earlier than that. Like he, I think it is different, but I don't think it's that huge of a departure. I think, the way that it was marketed and the way some of the singles came together and the talent that he ended up using sent the record into more of a different direction in company flow than even the production did.
Right.
And I think that that's sort of an important note for it. But I think it's of that time, very much so.
Oh, for
I
sure.
think it fits in the pocket with that.
I agree, and listening to it with years later ears, because like I said earlier, I didn't discover that album until like, so this came out in 99, so
That's a
14,
long
15 years
time, man.
later.
Shit, dude.
uh, you know which is crazy because this you
Yeah.
know this would be, I mean, this, if had I known about it earlier, this absolutely would have been a record I would have loved from jump. So but I think listening to it with different ears later on, you get a different appreciation for it because it's literally framed as a time capsule at that point because
Hmm.
the artist, the artist he has, D-Stroy, Juggaknots, and uh some of the other bigger names on there, at this point in time, those people have been on legendary projects and songs and records. So it's interesting to hear it from that perspective
Yeah.
versus growing up with it essentially.
I think one thing that is important to note as we now will start to get a little bit deeper into the actual recording part of it that I was part of. This record more than any, and this will sound funny, it's like, well, why would you talk about this record then? But this record more than almost any, I have a lot of like hazy memories of. I don't remember this recording this as strongly as I should. The parts that I do remember are some of the more important parts, which is why we're doing this episode. But a combination of, only sort of, parachuting in um, to do a portion of this record over a couple of days, really, with like multiple artists coming into those sessions. Really, what I think are incorrect credits all over this record. Um, and some songs that I worked on, there are two songs that are on the Spotify. If you go to Spotify, and I'm assuming any streaming service is probably set up the same way, you have to search for Pity the Fool to find this album. It's not listed under Mr. Lin, it's listed under various artists. I don't know whether that's on purpose or not. That I will leave that to the lawyers, but but that's how it's on streaming services. So it's a little bit harder to find, but there are two songs on the Spotify that are not on the vinyl copy. And of course, naturally, those are two of the songs that I worked on, that I distinctly remember working on. And that explains why, when coming into this record, I felt like I had done, 2/3 of it, at least recording wise. I didn't mix anything on this record, but I think I have mixed credits on it, but I didn't mix anything on this record. But I wasn't mixing yet. And so I thought I had worked on in some way like 2/3 of the record. And then when I listened to the vinyl, I was kind of like, I only really touched like maybe 45 or maybe 50% of what I just heard. And then I realized there were two more songs that I recorded that weren't on the vinyl. So like that is the reason why I felt that way. So it's strange. Unusual, I guess, is the way to define it. So, I think getting into that, and the way that the sessions were booked, and some of what you were talking about, in terms of like how this record was made and how it was different than like, say, a company flow session that I had worked on with Len, is like, Matador at the time was signing indie hip hop acts. They signed the Arsonists, they signed Nonfiction, they probably signed some other groups as well, or at least other artists. And they signed Mr. Len. And there was one guy that Matador brought on. I don't remember his name. I did meet him at the time. He was in some of the sessions. And he was basically hired by Matador to A&R hip hop. They just gave him that. And he brought in, like, he knew the culture, like he knew, he's from New York, and, obviously had spent some time listening to underground radio and knew what was going on, and brought in, very good artists. And that's how that came together, as far as I know. Obviously, I wasn't involved in how it actually came together, but so that sets the stage for the way that the sessions were. Like, I remember everybody was kind of there together for a lot of these sessions. I can remember working with Sear, Jean Grae, Kice of Course, Mr. Live, and another random person that was in the studio that I remember distinctly was there was Prince Paul. So Prince Paul was in a session or two, really just as a friend of Len's, as far as I could perceive it, at the time.
Right.
And obviously Paul had done producer records before, and I guess was there, kind of helping him to whatever degree, to understand how it was all going to work, because Len hadn't made a record before. That's what I thought. That's what I felt like the relationship was in the studio. Paul wasn't in all the sessions, but he was in a few. I didn't, I mean, the thing to understand too about my role at the time was, and this is important, especially in 2021 times, it wasn't my job to meet Prince Paul that day. You know what I mean? Like, he was just there and I was just there. Like, I know a lot of people, but oh my God, Prince Paul, he was there. But and he's a legend, obviously, for a reason. And he was at the time in 1999. Prince Paul had probably just put out Psychoanalysis, and obviously had done Gravediggers and Stetsasonic, and all the stuff that he did for De La Soul was already
Right.
like done. But so I don't have any interactions with Prince Paul. I can't even remember if he even introduced himself to me or not. I don't remember. I'm sure he did, but
you were just the guy.
I was definitely the guy in the chair, and I was the guy in the chair for a lot of people. Bless up to everybody that, like, that I met in that time period in my early days when I was 19. That I didn't work on a whole album with, obviously, but that I worked on a session or two with, that actually remembered me when they saw me 4 or 5 years later. Not everyone did, but some people did. Um, and so anyway, that was the kind of scene it was, you know, and that's why like the songs that are on the Spotify that aren't on the album, you know, it's a song with Kice of Course and Jean Grae, and a song with Kice of Course, Jean Grae, and Mr. Live. And I played them for you before we started because I wanted to make sure that we touched on those a little bit, because the sessions for those were so fluid. It was just like everyone was just around and was willing to just jump on another song for Len, because why not? You know,
Right.
and that was the way that it worked then. There wasn't like this, you know, pretentious, like, you know, all these people were friends, you know, and they just did stuff. And it was really, it was a cool thing to see, you know, and experience, and it guided the way that I thought about music, you know, and collaboration. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you are listening or watching and you know only have the vinyl or only remember the vinyl, there are a couple of extra songs on the Spotify that I worked on and that were a lot of fun to work on.
Which are really dope, by the way.
Yeah.
The one thing that um I wanted to touch on, just out of curiosity, because you know you mentioned Len's personality being loose and, you know, humorous, and he's very much like that online too. If anybody follows him on Twitter and Instagram, like he's always posting these crazy memes and funny stuff, along with you know, his travels and things like that. So those things very much show through his personality online. And you know, the few interactions I've had with him, he's always been, again, super nice and down to earth, and again, funny. Um, but you know, going from the Infesticons recording sessions, where you know you said that there was a lot of pressure in the room to, you know, do certain things and execute.
Hmm.
Was that the same kind of pressure in these sessions, or was it very much like loose and chill and everybody was just kind of just doing their thing and having a good time?
So it might have been, you know, for Len personally, I don't know, but because he surrounded himself with, you know, peers to his music and his sound the way he did. I mean, Gene was there like every session that I worked, basically. You know, even if there are lots of stretches where Gene wasn't even recording, as you're just hanging out. You know, that studio was, you know, I'm sitting at the desk guy. I mean, the studio kind of was shaped the way this studio is in a lot of ways. The only main difference is instead of the vocal booth being here, you know, you then looked out like past me right now would be like the studio, you know, and it was a larger room that you could put a kit in and put an amp in. So like when you had a vocalist in there, they're in sort of a room this size that was padded. And so, but that was the whole studio. You know, there was a live room across the hall, where you would really put like a full drum kit, and a like a if you were doing like hard rock recording or even pop
Right.
recording. But the point of me saying that is like there was a lounge sort of in the back, you know, in the same room, and people, anyone that recorded would generally sit on the couches in the back. When I was learning and assisting, that's where I would be, you know, or up on that stool like I talked about. And that was the studio, so it was a loose room. You know, in general, we created that, I think, at Ozone for people to come and feel creative and interesting, and do what they were doing. And because Len had guys like Mr. Live and you know, someone like Jean Grae and Kice of Course, who was a younger MC at the time that Len, I think, had, you know, kind of come in contact with out in Jersey, you know, because Len is from Jersey. You know, Kice of Course continued to work with Len on like the Dummy Smacks label when Len had the label deal going. Um, but I had not known who he was until I recorded him, and you know, everybody was just chill. So, you know, on the surface, it was very relaxed. I'm sure that there were some pressures to do the record and get it right, and you know, it was his first step out there, and you know, as far as I know, I mean, to this day, it's like I guess his only full length like this, you know, where he produced for rappers, you know, all these years later. You know, he's done some instrumental albums, and some of them are like EP length, and they're actually all really good. Um, and he obviously ran the label that he ran, and probably produced a lot of that stuff. But those weren't like, as far as I remember. Maybe I missed a record. Hopefully not. But those weren't like Mr. Len production albums. Those were like Mr. Len produces, you know, Kice of Course or whoever it might be.
Right.
Um, so this is a unique record in his career, I think, and certainly was at the time. So I'm sure there was some of that, but not as much. It was a different vibe because I also didn't work on the whole thing. Some of this record was done in other places. Some of it was mixed in other places. Some of Vassos mixed in the studio. So and some of it was recorded at different times too. I can get into that with This Morning in particular.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segue.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so the reason I didn't mention in all the times that I mentioned like who was at the studio like interacting, I didn't mention the Juggaknots because This Morning was recorded um, several months in advance of this album. It's hard to like, again, at 19, like everything is a long period of time because you've only like been breathing for 19 years. Um, as my recollection, at least 6 months, maybe even more, like before we were doing Mr. Len's sessions for his album, it was This Morning was being done for a compilation. So it was a compilation put together by Bill Laswell's label at the time. I don't remember the name of the label. I'm struggling to remember the name of the compilation. The compilation basically had like a bunch of sort of Bill Laswell, those kinds of, experimental pieces. It had a Killer Priest song on it, I remember. And I don't know what Bill Laswell produced on any of it because I know he didn't produce any of this, but this song was on there. And it later became the first single from this album. So I believe that the 12-inch for This Morning was sort of out or at least being manufactured before we even finished recording the rest of this.
Mm.
And so that song like existed. So I also recorded that song and was there. And that was also like a really amazing session to be a part of. I know the sample that I don't know a lot of samples, but I know that sample. I won't, I don't sample snitch, as people know. But I know the sample that he used and the artist that he used. It's a pretty popular artist. And then the vocal part is from this guy named that was the other thing. I wonder if it made like several compilations or something because I remember he got hired to work on, I believe the gentleman's name is R.L. Burnside. He's a blues artist. I could be wrong. It's something like that. He's probably really well known to people that know that music. But anyway, I believe the man had passed away several years before even 1999 when we were working on this stuff. And I think Matador was at the time putting together like a compilation or something of like, music influenced by him or something. And so all of that stuff, like the all those like samples with the when a chicken starts to clucking, starts to fucking, or whatever the fuck he says, like that stuff is all from like old blues records, like this kind of like grimy old like blues dude, which is sort of like right, musically like up Len's alley, I think. Anyway, so that's why all of those samples are on This Morning. Um, so yeah, there were several compilations that song landed on, or maybe I'm confusing two of them, but one way or another, that song was produced way long before this album was maybe even signed. I don't know. But that session was interesting, man. Like, I can remember, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school by saying this because some people have a really, I don't know. I'll ask you, because you're an MC too, and you're from more of that. You've done more battles and things like of that nature than I have. I'm just like a nerdy dude that writes songs, but I can remember like distinctly like them when they were writing verses. It was one of the only sessions where like people wrote in front of me, and it was great, to be able to watch Juggaknots, you know, uh, right in front of me. I don't think I met either of them. I might have met Bruin before that session, but I don't think I met either of them before that. It was definitely the first time I met Heroin, and like, I did some other sessions for Juggaknots at Ozone after this, for songs that kind of sat dormant for a long time, and then forms of them showed up on Use Your Confusion. I don't know whether it was what I recorded or not, but it was definitely songs that I had worked on. That being said, like I can remember them using like either a dictionary or a thesaurus or something to like
Mhm.
put words together and match syllables and stuff. And it was just really interesting to see them work, like to do that. I had heard about people doing stuff like that, but I'd never seen anyone actually do that. And like when I saw them actually do it, it made it cool, where I was like, oh, that's like the coolest shit ever now.
Yeah,
Juggernauts does that. So
I do it occasionally
yeah.
because as MCs and rappers, we have obviously we all have our own individual styles and the way that we put words together. But what I try and do consciously is not to use the same words over and over.
Right.
It's just to not only expand my vocabulary on a personal level, but also to just not mention the same things over and over, specifically using the same words, because sharp listeners will pick up on that.
Mm.
And, they'll be like, man, this guy talks about the same shit all the time. And
They
so,
done picked up on that from me a long time ago.
so, so occasionally if I, I'm pretty good with knowing what a specific word has different meanings, different ways, and certain words mean the same thing. I'm usually pretty good at picking those things up off the top of my head anyway, but occasionally I'll bust out a thesaurus or dictionary just to freshen it up. Especially if I'm stuck, sometimes I'll use just a word just to transition to the next line, and then that kind of opens the floodgates again to finish whatever I'm writing about. So
yeah, I mean, at that point in their careers, that was around the time when Heroin had first joined Juggaknots, because most people watching know, but like, the Clear Blue Skies EP that was on Fondle, she wasn't on that. And then when Wait came out from Indelibles, that was the first time that I had seen her introduced as a member of the Juggaknots. And this is all pretty quick succession. You know what I mean? Like from Clear Blue Skies to Wait to, to this album. My point is, like, at that point, Heroin had probably only been rapping for like 2 or 3 years, at least, like for real, like going to studios and doing things and like that. So, they were still young. Like it's crazy. Like, I mean, it's crazy to think of me young, but it's crazy to think of like any of these folks that were so talented so early in their life. When you hear that song, that's a magic song. The way
right.
the way the beat is flipped, the samples with R.L. Burnside, and the verses, they pair and balance each other so perfectly. Like that's what, that song is exactly what it was supposed to sound like, and recording that was really dope. And that was probably one of my first sessions at Ozone. That was an early one. I mean, Ozone was crazy, man. I mean, I came in there as a kid that, came up listening to Stretch and Bobbito, and within like the first 3 months, I had met like practically everyone from that scene that I wanted to meet, so that was good for me at the time. But I guess at this point, maybe I'll run through sort of the track list a little bit and just give a quick idea of like what I was there for and what I wasn't there for.
Yeah, because
And what I maybe was there for, I don't remember.
because what's crazy is, and the people that don't know, so all the credits are on the actual vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of errors.
Yeah.
A lot. I don't think, honestly, from the looks of it, I don't think they got anything right with the credits.
I
Um,
I can I don't know, man. I mean, there's no credits on the actual vinyl here. Like this is thank you, so it is a credit. But and then there's like some overarching like artwork and executive producer credits here, and he's got like some cool like stuff that he wanted to write out across the top here, like you know very much his style of humor and all that. And then obviously the track list. And so when you open it up, and this is all I could find. Like obviously the internet is going to be based off of this, so whatever's on the net is probably wrong too. But on here, it distinctly says, um, what the fuck? Just for example, what the fuck? Gritty version, Mr. Live, mixed by NASA and Mr. Len. If I mix this song, then I was put into a time capsule and do not remember any of that happening. I definitely was in the room. I definitely recorded it, but I didn't mix that song. And then there's like other stuff like, that I did work on. Not that I mixed anything on here, but there's other stuff like for sure. If there's one thing that I will never forget, it's recording Taco Day. So I know I was there, but yet this one says recorded at HAH Studios. So there's just stuff that's not correct, and that is what it is. That's I'm just gonna blame Matador because it's easier.
but
But
a lot, what a lot
but
of people don't understand, a lot of people don't realize too, that was kind of par for the course for that time.
Yeah,
there was a lot of errors with the indie stuff at that particular time. So whoever was not doing their job needs to be punched in the face.
yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff was definitely, I've been a part of errors in credits in the past. For me, I don't really. I engineered, I don't know, like hundreds of things back then. Like if this was like my only thing I ever did, I'd probably be like, crestfallen, you know what I mean? Like if this was like the only chance that I got to work on a record or something. And for me that's kind of how you treat it, but a lot of labels didn't at that time treat it that way. They didn't take credit seriously, particularly for engineers. They didn't take those credits very seriously. So it is what it is. I don't really care about it except to say like if you're the kind of person that does dig into credits, like these aren't correct. So at least as far as for me. But in any case, that brings me to the whole part of like this being hazy, because if you layer that on top of like me trying to remember everything that I did like 20 plus years ago, 22 years ago, and the fact that like I remembered sitting and working on this probably for like 5 days straight of lockouts, and two of the songs that I remember distinctly working on aren't on here. So like it's like completely confusing for me.
Right.
But yeah, we talked about this morning. Get Loose from Mass Influence was, I believe, recorded down in Atlanta, where they're from, and I don't know who mixed it. I don't remember if Vasos mixed it. I don't think he did. But Mass Influence, by the way, for the true connoisseurs, like H2O, who's in Mass Influence, was the same H2O from You're So Stupid, and You're So Stupid was one of my favorite, like from that late major label subsidiary era of indie, of underground hip hop. Like I loved You're So Stupid. I still listen to Van Full Pakistans all the time. The Hurt, I don't remember recording that. I definitely know the Merc stuff was added later. Straight, I did record with Q Unique. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Actually, we could talk about that now. So like straight again, like I'm meeting all these people for the first time after listening to them on the radio. So that was like probably the first time I had met Q Unique. I recorded him a couple other times, but I didn't know him. I don't know him that well. But yeah, it was an interesting session because, and I'll get into this a little bit. I don't typically do this because Vasos was a brilliant engineer, but on this record, I think the attempt was, as I remember it, was to make this sound like it was a live show.
Mm.
You know, to record it straight, and then it's supposed to sound like it's a live show. And I hate to say it, but I don't think we did that. I don't think it just sounds kind of not good. So it's sort of like the one whiff at the time as far as like Ozone mixing goes. Um, I think that, you know, to Vasos's credit, like he always tried to like push the envelope, and that's what he taught me. Whether I'm, you know, obviously or not, like subliminally or not, you know, like, you know, pushing the envelope on what you could do with phase and panning and flanging and reverb and delays and you know, just warping sounds.
Right.
And you know, I think he gave it an honest try on this rec on straight, but I mean, you just heard it yourself, so you could tell me if I'm just over analyzing it or not. But it definitely has
No,
a weird sound to it. The
I
mix
agree.
wise.
When you try and do that, it it doesn't translate well. I can speak from personal experience because our old engineer for Wastelands, he tried to do that to one of our songs. And it just, to this day, I can't listen to that song. And I don't have the version of that particular song that's not like, I don't have the rough mix of that song anymore, so I can't even like go back and enjoy that.
Hmm.
So that's like one of the
Hmm.
few songs that I can't really listen to because he tried to make it sound like it was a live performance, and again, it just didn't it doesn't it you know, you just, that particular thing doesn't translate well
Yeah.
to recording. So
There's
I agree with you.
there's certainly ways to make, you know, and it's been done on records where you can make like a host sound like he's, you know, live. You know, you put like a particular kind of reverb, you know, and you know, some different like, you know, people talking in the background. The crowd sounds on here are really weird. So it doesn't sound like a room full of people. It sounds almost like the crowd sound almost like I used to play like this soccer game like on an 8-bit Sega, and it almost sounds like that. It almost sounds like generated. So it was weird, man. I you know, I just remember a lot of effort went into that. You know, a lot of effort went into trying to make that sound like it was live. And I also would say, you know, the mastering of that particular song, I don't think that person got what was being attempted. So the things that person did are kind of weird too. So like
Right.
it just is what it is, you know. I've got plenty of, you know, checkers on my card as well, you know, of like songs that I'll hear back and I'd be like, man, I remember what I was trying to do. It just doesn't
I
sound like what I wanted, you know. So
mean, it happens,
it does.
you know.
It's interesting that it happened on a unique song because that guy puts a lot. I've recorded him at least twice, and at some point we'll talk about Fondle and Fossils, and I'll tell a funny story about recording Q, but at L's house. But he's intense, man. Like he's, you know, I don't know. I don't. For me, I don't know if it's as noticeable or not noticeable, but like when you're in the room with him rapping, like he's really intense. Like he gets really loud, you know, like but like when you put him in the mix, he just sounds like he's talking normal or like rapper normal, you know?
Right.
But he's one of those guys that's deceiving. Like when I recorded him both times, that's what the other story is about, is like he is very loud in the room. And but he doesn't sound like he's shouting like ODB or something, you know what I mean?
Right.
But he is very loud, and some guys are like that, you know. I've probably recorded other guys like that like in the room you're just like, holy shit, like this guy's really yelling, and then you bring up the music and you play it back and you're like, oh, okay, that's what he always sounds like, and it doesn't sound shouted at you like that.
Right.
It's a weird thing. At least that was my experience with him at the time. But that was a cool session. His session was I don't think anyone else was there when Q came in. That was another early one too. I think this, if I remember right, like this one, like there were a couple of spot sessions, and then there was like maybe 5 days in a row, or at least 3 days in a row, where I just was only working on lens stuff. Um, it wasn't an intensive like Infesticons in my recollection we were working on that for at least like 2 weeks straight. Maybe there was a day where somebody else had something booked, but like for the most part, it was like two business days worth of days straight. This was a little bit more spread out. Um, so after that, there's Girl Got to Give It to Me, with Lord Sear. So the only
That,
thing I
that
remember, go ahead.
that song is ridiculous, man. And it's great. It's great. It fits the record so well, and but it's just so over the top.
Mm-hmm.
it but it where it is on the album, it provides some like a breath,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
and it gives you a nice change of pace, and then goes right back into
Yeah.
what you're accustomed to. But when when I first listened to the album, because I didn't discover this album until years later. um you go I me personally, you go in with like an expectation of what you think you're going to hear, because based on, again, at this time Len is already an established, you know legendary individual within independent music. So I already, like, me
Right.
personally, I had an expectation of what I thought I was going to hear. So that's why some of this album caught me off guard in a good way, because it wasn't what I was expecting. So when I was heard this song, I was like, this is crazy. So but it's a great song.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, and this is an interesting album because this keeps coming up with this album, and it didn't with some of the last records that we talked about on previous episodes. Is this was as much like starstruck or intimidated as I probably was equally any other time, like recording on stuff, because it was so rapid fire. People were in and out, like really quick, like. And my only experience with Sear was enjoying the Alcoholic Vibe single from Fondling, which I loved, and of course, like him doing like the faux reggae chorus on "Walk Like a Duck" from Curious, which that song was like my fucking anthem in 1995 when I was in high school, and and then of course hearing him on Church and Bob just fucking absolutely herbing people, like completely just embarrassing people, like fucking rappers would come up and be there as guests, and he would just fucking crack on them for no reason. Like it was, but that was part of that became the shtick of the show, is that like
Right.
come up to Stretch and Bob, like Sear is gonna crack on you. And obviously the caller segments that everyone these days has probably heard, that was like his main role on the show, was to just herb motherfuckers. And so, I'm 19 and I'm like kind of shaking on my boots because I'm like, oh man, this dude gonna clown my shoes. Is this guy gonna fucking clown my face? Like, what's he gonna do? And of course, he did nothing because I'm just like a guy, like in a room, you know what I mean? But he, Sear is on, like it's not like an act, like when, I mean, Sear is, I'll talk about this too, but like Sear, has worked for like Shade 45 on Sirius for many, many years now. I believe he's still there, but if he's not, he had been there for at least, 10, 15 years. Probably is still there. And, you know, he is that guy, he's always on. And so like, he did add some levity to the sessions, and I remember it, but my personality, especially then, it was really reserved. You know what I
Right.
mean? And like, and I socially, like when people are like super outward like that and outgoing, it kind of makes me like kind of close up a little bit more and just kind of play the background and let them have the stage. You know what I mean? Not that I was ever really in a position to own the stage, socially at that age and in that role anyway. But in general, like people that are like super on it like that, I get like super quiet, like, and I just sat there like trying not to do anything that would get me made fun of. Like that was like the entire goal of that session, was to not fuck up any recording in any way, to not get made fun of and get herbed by this dude. And so I did accomplish that. I did not get clowned as far as I remember. So to me that was, but I'm just saying, like, that was like a real thing for me, and it probably was completely ridiculous. But that was a real thing. Like to this day, me telling this story, like that shit was so real, at the time that like I literally like when the session ended, rather than like trying to socially interact with Sear and like maybe make a friend or at least have a cool interaction in a session, I was just terrified of being clowned. So like when he left the session or the session ended, whatever happened, like it was more of an accomplishment in my mind that I didn't get clowned rather than that we had a good session. It was super weird. I mean, that's that young shit. You know what I mean? Like
Right. He's
when
like,
you're,
I could breathe again.
yeah, exactly. And and it continued. Like Sear is one of the few people that continue to intimidate me for zero reason. My 9 to 5 work history after I left Jux, I bounced around a little bit and I eventually ended up at Sirius. And I worked at Sirius Radio, Sirius Satellite Radio at the time. I was a sports producer, believe it or not. It's like a different world. This is why I say a lot of things are was, because I don't know who that guy that was producing sports is anymore. But I did that for a while, and it was good while it lasted. It was bad when it was bad. But I didn't work in the music department at all at Sirius. And Sear I would see in the hallway all the time, and of course he didn't really remember me, because why would he? And I would nod, you know what I mean? But I never like got up the gumption to be like, hey man, I recorded you back in the day, like just wanted to say what's up. I never did that. Like I never got up the guts to do that. I just would always just see him in the hallway and be like, what up, man? And like that would be it.
That's funny. Why were you subconscious? It was a subconscious thing. You're afraid to get roasted.
I think so. Yeah, there's no other reason. Like I have I don't know, man. I've tried and I've talked about it, like not being intimidated by other musicians or personalities or whatever, and that's part of being an engineer. And it's also part of
Right.
being a producer and part of touring. It's part of everything that you do in music is to like not show your cards. You know what I mean? But and then when I worked in at Sirius, I was dealing with like sports celebrities on a regular basis. Like I knew all kinds of people. You know what I mean? I had like famous athletes in my fucking cell phone. Like I just I that was just part of the deal. So like I was always involved in like celebrity from a very young age. But it's not about how famous somebody is. I guess some people are like that. Like if they met fucking like I don't know who's like the most famous actor right now, fucking The Rock or some shit. Like they would be intimidated just because of that person's fame. For me, it was like
Right.
more about like what they're known for. And like when you introduce me to somebody that's known for just cracking on people, like that's gonna put me in a certain like defensive stance, which is totally unfair to Sear, but I'm sure he
Well, with
didn't really give a
growing up, how,
shit, like so.
grow, growing up, how we grew up, like that was part of the game. Like when you were growing up, your friends would crack on you, or like other people would crack on you. Nobody wanted to go home being known as the guy that got roasted. You know what I mean? So
I came up when my first job in the city, we were all the same age. A bunch of us were, 18, 19 years old before I was at Ozone. And we would clock out and stand outside of the stock exchange. We were runners at the stock exchange. That's what I did right after I got out of high school while I was going to IR to recording school. And the routine was we would clock out and stand in a cipher and diss each other. And that was like what I was used to, So none of it was like this, oh my God, I've never seen anyone say your mama before. It was like all like very familiar to me and fun to me, but not from, I didn't, he was like the king of that shit. So I didn't want to be up
right,
in that,
yeah,
you know what I
nah,
mean? Like, nah. But anyway, so, next track is Taco Day. You know, so again, like if there's a song that I remember recording, it's Taco Day. Some of the like, did I hit record or was I standing behind Vassos while he hit record? Is a little bit hazy because this was that period where this album, there's certain ones that I remembered that I definitely was actually active recording, and other ones that I don't remember actively hitting it. So I was probably just in the room. But it was at that point where they were transitioning me from assistant engineer to recording engineer.
Right.
And so, you know, I mean, it was a heavy session, man. Like, it's important. I'll try to do my best to remember and set the stage. It's important to remember that, like, in 1999, school shootings were still very new, at least in the media. Columbine had happened, um, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years or 3 years before. And there were other shootings, but nothing really approached the level of Columbine yet at that time. And Columbine was still really seen culturally as an outlier rather than a norm,
Right.
which was incorrect, obviously. Now that we're 20 years on, we see that. But this song, was, to my mind, like, was directly addressing Columbine and sort of that whole thing. And I'm not going to get into, like, the actual theme of the song because that's Gene's work. But in terms of recording it, it was shocking, and it was like it was one of those sessions that completely, to some degree, that song, like, changed my perception of what hip hop could do. Um, it it wasn't just a song about Columbine or about school shootings. It was the way it was presented. It's four verses. It's like fucking, like, almost 6 minutes long. There's no
Almost 10
chorus.
minutes long, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
It was an epic saga. Like, it was long verses, and later on, like, Len went in and added some of the. You know what? I take that back. Len did record some of those voiceovers with us at Ozone. Most of the characters you hear, if not all of them, are him just doing weird voices, like the grandfather is like, and it's like, and that's like Len doing that voice, and
Man, that's crazy.
which is funny. Like, when I hear it, I remember Len doing that, so it's funnier than it should be. If you didn't record it. But it's I don't know, but it's hard to put into words, that song, man. Like, I remember years later. I mean, I put a lot of people onto that song. That's like the Fantastic Planet of, like, indie rap songs. Like, it's just like a thing that I feel like it's my job to introduce people to.
No, man, that
Um,
that song is incredible. I mean, I always try and approach things from fandom respectfully and not, fanboy out too
yeah,
much. But this is one of those songs, and Jean Grae particularly, because I've always been a fan of her, which just makes it even crazier that I had no idea that this song existed until 2014 or 15. Because I was listening to Jean Grae, way before that. So
right.
it makes me want to punch myself in the head sometimes for not knowing. But the just within the context of that record, with everything that came before it and after it, like, that stands out so much in a good way. It's just almost like the crown jewel of, like, that album.
It is, and it's an album
Be-
with This Morning on it, which is crazy.
yeah,
You
which
know?
says a lot about
Yeah.
the skill and the ability of someone like Gene, who still is making incredible music to this day, by the way, if people don't know. But yeah, that song is crazy because from an artistic standpoint, as an artist myself, that's one of those songs, and I don't know if you've had this feeling, but that's one of those songs where you're like, man, I wish I would have came up with that idea. But that song is so involved and so creative and so detailed and so visual that like, I don't think my brain could come up with something like that. It's
Yeah.
so epic. It's like it's a movie in song form.
You know what?
Um,
What's funny about, like, this point in her career is like I had already recorded her before this album. Independently, they booked. I guess she booked it, or the label that she was working with booked it. I recorded her when she was still What, which was her
Mhm.
original name, and she did a single, an A and a B side with this producer from Europe called Tech9. And they, I think it was a team actually, but it was mainly one guy that was working on this project. I have that 12-inch buried in here somewhere. I didn't get credit on that either. But I remember recording it, and the credit for her is still What on that record. That was obviously her name when she was part of the group that put out like Negro League Baseball and They Lied and that 12-inch, and that was what
Mhm.
kind of put her on the map. Working with making records, and then you know, then this was the first time that like I had met her introduced to me as Jean Grae, and this is when she first changed her name. And on this whole album, she's present on a lot of it, and she's on both the songs that are on the Spotify. She did a lot of work on this record, and considering that she had done Taco Day, like that she had that many more verses, for this project is crazy. But she was at this point in her career that I can hear it, where like she was sort of like able to do like shock rap stuff without it being just for the sake of shocking you. There was like a deeper meaning and also a tongue in cheek kind of comedy to what she was doing
Right.
that was highly elevated compared to the peers of that time period. And as far as like being in the room with her for a lot of these sessions, again, like I'm looking back now at 42 at people that were older than I was, but that were much younger than I am now. And for a young MC in her 20s that had not gone on to the success and the opportunity she would later go on to after this album, and some of the credit that she finally got that she deserved. She was really professional and had everything together and was like, one of those people that could record like really complex verses and then smile a second later, and I mean, even recording Taco Day, like it was like there was a sense that we all knew that we were making a very serious song, but it was, and you can hear it on the recording, like, but there was also a level of like, this is pretty fucked up, huh? It was like
Right.
just like this comedy underneath it, this dark comedy underneath it. And that's part of Len too. Like, when you listen to this whole album, you hear a lot of like his dark humor in there.
Right.
I'll get to that with what the fuck in a second. But yeah, I mean, it was a long session to record that, and I almost remember Vassos mixing that. I can't say for sure. I know I didn't mix it, but I just remember hearing it enough times where I'm super familiar with it, and it was like awkward silence after each verse, because it was like, whoa, that was crazy. I mean, the verse where I think it's the third verse, is where she is starting to snap and is like shaving her head and like kills the grandfather at home. Like that verse is crazy. Like even to this day, when I hear it now, like, because I haven't listened to it in a little while, like it's like, how do you say shit like, how does that happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and in 1999, you know, I mean, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but 1999, you're only like 25 years away from the birth of hip hop, and we're out here like making these, well, Gene is out here and Len like making these a song like that, like just that short time later. To me that was a huge advance, in what indie hip hop could be. Um, and it is really the crowning jewel kind of on this record. And it was an honor to be a part of that taking place.
No, like I said, I try and approach things respectfully, and
You're right. I do,
um,
I do too. Believe me.
but man, that song, it's anytime I listen to it, and same with you. Like anytime, anybody that I have a chance to show it
Mm-hmm.
to, especially in the context of now, because
Yeah.
unfortunately there's been obviously so many more of these events. It's it's a shame that it holds up in a modern way. It should hold, to me, I mean, obviously this is another conversation, but it should hold up as, man, that really made sense for that time, and that's amazing that she was able to capture that moment. But the fact that it like is still relevant in a modern sense is I'm sure is the, maybe even for her is that's one of the saddest things that it could be is in its legacy, is it still holds up in a modern sense now, because there's been so many of those things happening over the last few years, which is crazy. But
The other thing that I just remembered about that, the way that she recorded that, I got triggered to remember it because I was going to mention there was a music video made for this song, which obviously was not played on any television channel because it was fucking, a school shooting music video. There are really bad versions, like dub of a dub of a dub with drop, like audio drops, like on YouTube. Normally, I would have just linked it down below, but they're so bad that if you want to find it, go find it. But they're such a bad representation of the video and of the song. But the video, the way that it worked is they cast this white girl, like a high school student looking actress, and she I guess memorized all the lyrics and was able to mouth through everything, and I can
wow.
remember there being scenes where she's cutting herself and she's bleeding in the mirror, and there's all the news reporter stuff and all these like sort of scenes where like the news reporter has hair and then she has a shaved head, so it was very like almost like Mr. Robot-esque kind of thing. It was a cool video. It was made at a time when the technology was not really there to make this kind of video, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a good video and it wasn't well made. But there are not really good copies of it to see what it really was. Like, not only was it, an SD video from 99 or 2000, I think the video was made a good couple months after the album had come out. So it might have not been released until 2000. But the reason I bring all that up is because I do remember now, remembering that they cast that sort of like white high school girl to play the role. It was because it was written from that perspective, and I do
Right,
remember
yeah.
moments where the only real retakes I remember of Jean doing it was her stopping and saying, "No, that sounds too much like me. I have to do it in this voice." And that's pretty, you want, that's what makes the song so special, is it, and there's plenty of examples of her rapping like her all over this album, which is dope. But like, because this song was so conceptual, like she literally would go into character and stress certain aspects of her, uh,
Right.
you know, linguistics or whatever, to make herself sound more like a high school student in a suburban environment. So, um, I mean, kudos. What else can you say? It's a great song.
While we're on the subject of her, this would
Hmm.
be a good segue because I just thought of this. I don't know if you can answer it, but just out of curiosity, maybe you know or don't know. I mean, like we have touched on, she's all over this album.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe it's just because, like you said, people were there all the time.
Hmm.
So maybe it was just because she was there, she just jumped on joints. But was that a con? Was that a? Do you think that was a conscious effort to have her showcase more, or because she was, or maybe it was just because she was so talented, she was just jumping on more songs because she was there and she was killing everything she was on. So it was like, cool, let's get her on more stuff. So
I think it was more the latter. They'd have to answer. I know they had a really good camaraderie and chemistry, in the studio, and they knew each other outside of this album. It's not like they were brought together, like they were friends.
right,
So there was an ease, and I think that friendship is what made it like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out at the studio, and then, oh, this beat is dope. I'm gonna write to this, and if you want it, I'll drop it. If you want to keep it, if not, whatever. And that was sort of more the vibe, and that's how she ended up on so much stuff, at least as far as I know. Um, you know, um, I was not part of the sessions for Love Venom that I remember. So obviously a song like that is very deliberate.
Right.
I would say that about The Hurt too. I don't remember if we recorded The Hurt or not, because some of the lines sound too familiar to me. You know, the thing about recording hip hop in particular is there'll be songs that I won't remember recording until I hear the verse, and then I remember having heard that line, whatever line it is, not particularly this album, but like a line of somebody's. I remember hearing it an unhealthy amount of times, and there's no way that I would have heard that part of that verse on my own that many times. So then I thus know that I recorded it. So there is stuff like that that happens. So I think that that's the way it is with The Hurt, but Love Venom I definitely didn't work on. I would have loved to have worked with, on a song with Bruin and Jean Grae on a track together like that. But as
Yeah,
far as I
that's
remember, I was not there for that.
if not for Good Morning and Taco Day, there's so many joints on this album. And you know, I know we've been kind of joking about my lateness to this album, but there's nothing wrong with discovering music later
Mm-hmm.
on. That's the beauty of it. So if you haven't heard this record, cop it on iTunes or whatever digital service you purchase from, or find it on Spotify, or even go on Discogs and find yourself a copy. Because in the lead up, I only own this album digitally. I found a vinyl copy for a really good price. So
Yeah, I mean, we've said a couple times on Flashback Sessions that like indie hip hop from this time period is fortunately and also unfortunately not selling for a lot. And a lot of that is because, you know, as a culture, we were still a DJ oriented culture at that time in the late 90s. So the idea was press up 5,000 copies of everything. And, and then other records, this album probably was pressed up more than that. So, uh, there's plenty of copies of these things floating around. And even though like the artist is not going to get anything for a secondhand copy on Discogs, I'm sure I could speak for myself. I would much rather have it sitting on someone's record shelf neatly or being photographed on Instagram with somebody excited to get it and listen to it than have it sitting in a storage locker at some Discog guy's house,
right.
or down the street from his house. So
Yeah.
so go and grab it on Discogs if you like vinyl. I mean, this is available, and like I said, it's on Spotify, but you have to search Pity the Fool, which is the name of the album, in order to find it. If you search for it under Mr. Len, you could find it under like Appears On, but it's not in his artist section for whatever reason.
And it is available on iTunes, and it is available on other streaming services, because that's when I bought it digitally on my trip back from New York. That's where I got it initially, was on iTunes. So it is available out there. It's definitely one of the better great records from that era too. So again, I will gush a little more.
Mm-hmm. So now we'll take a breath and we'll move on a little bit more through the rest of it. Force Fed is a rock song that I remember Len talking about recording out in Jersey. I don't remember hearing it until I listened to it this time. But I wasn't a part of that. Bring It To Me from D-Stroy. I honestly don't remember if I recorded this or not. I think that I did. I think I worked on it. I wish I could remember, because I am and always was a big fan of the Arsonist. And D-Stroy is another guy that's worked out of Sirius for a long time. And I would see him in the hallways and be like, hey. And not like, it was weird. Like Sirius was weird because you would see, it's funny that a lot of these characters that are on this record were there all the time, but like, you would see like indie hip hop people, legendary hip hop people all the time, like in the hallways. I remember I had a studio booked for a NASCAR show that I was producing at the time. It's a totally different subject, but these guys were in the studio and they were recording a show or whatever, and I had to knock on the door and be like, "Hey, I know you guys are recording, but I'm actually live. When it's live, it'll just turn on. You know what I mean? Like they would have been live on the wrong channel if it had just, so I was like, hey, I'm live in about 10 minutes. And like, oh, okay, cool, man. No problem. They were really cool about it. And all of a sudden they were like, somehow it just clicked. And I was like, are you guys awesome too? And they're like, yeah. I was like, oh my God, like I'm a huge fan of you guys. I'm so sorry I have to kick you guys out of the studio. And like, I mean, awesome too, or like, those guys like predate like fucking Red Alert, like those
Right.
guys are legendary, like hip hop DJs. They were like basically one of the if not like it was like them and like Mr. Magic, like, but they were on 105.9 for years out here. Long story short, I would run into people like that all the time, and most of the time I wouldn't talk to. I wouldn't go out of my way for it because I had part of it was like the training of like don't sweat the musicians, and part of it was like my role here as a sports producer. These guys don't want to talk to me. You know what I mean? Like I'm out
Right.
here like fucking trying to book Greg Anthony or something. Like which is probably totally wrongheaded, but I also felt like it was a weird environment to talk to people about music, you know, um, or about my music in particular or whatever. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, I guess, for another show. But yeah, I feel like I would remember meeting D-Stroy, um, because I was a fan of his, and obviously he had still has a very strong personality as well. So I guess I didn't record that. What the fuck was Mr. Live, and it's another guy that like I was a huge fan of. I'm still a huge fan of Mr. Live. Mr. Live did a lot of work with Earl Blaze. He did a couple of 12 inches with Tony Bones, who was this English MC that moved to Brooklyn and lived out here for a long time. Some of their like cheeky songs like Splashing Over Monica were like tracks that I fucking loved as a young kid, like, and I still have those 12 inches behind me. So I was a huge fan of Mr. Live, meeting him. He was really good. He was a good dude to me, when we met. And he did this song, and the one thing I was going to point out about What the Fuck is you hear like all of the guy explaining like the word fuck, the
Uh-huh.
samples, and he's like, giving all the examples of how to use the word fuck. And like when I heard that again, it reminded me of how we got that. And I don't know where that originates from. It's probably some old, like, 70s or whatever, like comedy sketch that was only on cable back before when 8 people had cable or something. I have no idea where that comes from. But I remember how Len got it, and it's a big marker for the era is 1999. Like basically, I think I remember him telling me that like a fan like sent him that audio through the internet, through email, through the internets at the time in 1999 or 98 maybe he got it, and was like, yo, you should use this for something, it's hilarious. And like, and he did, and he put that together, and like, Live wrote the song, and we had that. I was trying to remember how we had it because this was even before cell phones. Like this was pre cell phone, so it's not like he even had it on a flip phone and played it out. Like I think that this was brought to us from his own computer from like a thumb drive or something, and then we uploaded it, or he sampled it or something. Like, but it was definitely like the internet, and there's a lot of other things on here that I suspect probably came from the internet or what, like the early, like the pre-YouTube internet, like. So I thought that was just interesting to bring up because like other guys had done stuff like that too, and it's just crazy, man, to think about like how young the internet was when we were recording, you know. But there are two versions of What the Fuck. There's the 12-inch version, and there is the version that's on the album. And so if I remember right, we recorded this version, and then Len went home and toyed with the beat and did like a remix. And I can remember this really distinctly. Like I remember loving like the one that's on the 12-inch. And I like this one, but I love the one that's on 12-inch because it's just like this fucking crazy. Like he did it, I guess he did it with a turntable. He took like this kind of bass rock guitar and like just made this weird sound with it. And I can remember this like it was like really well that like again like Gene was in the studio all the time and Lennon Live were there and they played her the two versions and she's like nah, definitely this one. This one's way better than the other one. And she was talking about the one that's on the album, the gritty version with the piano and all that.
Mhm.
And I just remember sitting there and thinking, no, no, the other one, but I couldn't say anything. You know what I mean? Like, who the fuck am I? So, like, but I remember thinking, like, no way, this one is way better. So they're both dope and they're both on the 12-inch, I think. But this is the one that made the album, the gritty version.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so,
funny with this song because I heard this song. I heard What the Fuck years ago.
mm,
And never knew that it was like from this album specifically. So because it would always pop up on like different mixtapes and things like that. um and same thing, the 12, I prefer the 12-inch version, so I do like both versions.
yeah.
But I remember when I heard this, first heard this album, I was like, oh cool, this song is going to be on it. So I was expecting to hear the 12-inch version, not knowing at the time that there was two versions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this sounds way different than I remember. And then I was like, oh, it's probably a different version. So yeah, it's funny that you say that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this version is really dope. Like in the context of the album, actually, to
Yeah.
be fair. But I didn't go back and listen to the 12-inch version. I can because I have the 12-inch behind me too. And I'm going to probably after this just to listen to it again. I haven't heard that in a long time. I just remember loving that beat and like that was one of my favorites too. So to close out, Love Venom. Like I said, I didn't record that. I don't think I was a part of that at all. Dummy Smacks, I did not get to meet Chubb Rock, which is really disappointing. Now, as I sit here at this time period, I would have loved to have met Chubb Rock. Like, how many opportunities does one get to meet Chubb Rock? Um,
Right.
so I did not record Chubb Rock on that track. His stuff was, if I remember right, which is questionable. I think his stuff was recorded, and I recorded Live's parts over that beat. Because again, that's one of those tracks that I know I didn't have a heavy hand in, but I remember Live's verse like way too well to have just remembered it from being a fan. Like I remember it like I recorded it. So I think that I recorded Live over existing Chubb Rock material. But that track is fucking so dope, and it's toward the end of the album. So in some ways, it kind of like gets lost in the mix of the other songs, but like the way the beat starts and stops, so fucking ill.
Right.
That's awesome. And then Family Matters. I don't think I recorded that, even though I recorded a ton of Kice of Course. I don't remember meeting or recording anyone named Steady Rock at that time, so I don't think I worked on that one either. There is. I'm hoping that you noticed this. This is a test for you. Did you notice what Len did on the end of this album?
Nah.
You didn't, yeah, because you didn't know the songs I played you because one of them is that. There's a hidden song on the vinyl
Really?
because Mr. Len, like so there's a hidden song if you're not going to be able to see it on this, but I will pretend that you can. But if you look at the way the vinyl is, there's this part right here, which you may or may not be able to see any of what I'm pointing out. But there
No,
basically
I can
there's
I
a you
I can
can
see
so
it.
there's like basically a dead line right here, and this is just vinyl silence. And then it goes into the third song here, which I forgot which one it is, but now that I remember, it's one of the two extra songs on Spotify that's not on the album.
Oh,
Um,
dope.
I forgot which one it is, but anyway, so yeah, it's a hidden track, and if you look at the track list, all of a sudden you're like four songs, three songs, three songs, two songs. So that's why there's a third song on here. They just hit it on vinyl, like I mean, people would hide tracks on CD all the time, and for all I know, all these songs are on a CD copy of Pity the Fool. I have no idea, but yeah, hidden track on vinyl, man, classic Len, you know, and like there's also a thing on Lil Johnny from the Hospital. There's a song called No Lock on there that I don't remember if it actually works. I'd have to go back and listen to the vinyl. But the intention of No Lock was that it was going to be what's called a lock groove. And so if you cut vinyl a certain way, um, you can create a lock groove. So basically, it's a beat that just repeats and repeats and repeats. Where it skips, it lands on beat every time, and you can do that at the end of records. And like No Lock on the vinyl was supposed to or does form a lock groove with that beat. So that No Lock beat, that kind of flip loop that Len made, like is the intention is that it could just play like forever. That's the kind of shit that he was doing then, man. But like you said, you know, I mean, he comes from that and is actively very much a part of DJing and vinyl culture, and he knew that stuff then. You know, he knew that you could hide a track on vinyl. He knew that you could lock groove stuff. I didn't know that stuff then. You know,
I didn't either. I'm gonna have to go back and
you know,
check my copy of fucking Lil Johnny and see what's
yeah.
what, because I listen to that shit all the time. But after Happy Happy Joy Coins, I just turn it off. I don't, you know, I don't usually let it sit on the table.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to go back and check that
And
out.
and what's funny is especially back then, it was even more so. Like, cause now when people buy vinyl, and there's no knocking this is awesome. When people buy vinyl, they sit in a room with a pair of headphones and they put the record on and they stare at the record spin around in a circle and they look at the cover art, or maybe they go on their computer while they're listening to vinyl. And it's an active, very active experience where you're letting the whole record play all the way through and then flipping it, playing it through. Back then, like, you know, most of the people back then that bought it because they were DJs or amateur DJs and they wanted these songs for their mixtapes. And that's why you would buy an album on vinyl back then. Yes, there were
Right.
people that bought vinyl, bought indie hip hop vinyl in 1999 that sat with it the way I just described, the way that people buy indie hip hop vinyl today. But most of the people I was around and most of my experience with vinyl records, being an amateur DJ myself back then, was, oh shit, you know, now I've got Love Venom on vinyl and I've got The Hurt on vinyl. Those weren't on 12 inches. Now I could play those on a mixtape. And that's why you bought this. So, you know, the idea that you would have a hidden track and no one would notice was not unusual because you were jumping into the tracks that you needed when you were mixing, or even if you were listening, you wanted to hear one song at a time. It wasn't like you were sitting and quietly listening to a full album like how you would do today. So
Right.
it was even more hidden back then, I would feel, and more of a interesting thing to do. Because I think if you did it today, it would be cute and it would be funny, and there's a cool factor to it, but it would also be like me when I listen to this. I listened to it out on my turntable out in the living room when I was doing my work, and I got up after the last song to I was sitting there. I heard the Family Matters end, so I immediately got up because I didn't, you know, you don't want your fucking needle to get fucked up.
Right. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I get up and I look at the turntable and I see dead space and I see another track and I'm like, this motherfucker, man, like this guy, like hit a track on it. And I actually didn't know that. I did not know that he did that. I didn't know that they manufactured it that way. I've had this record, good example. I've had this record since then. I never knew there was a hidden track on this vinyl.
That's
So,
crazy.
you
It's the
know,
same thing. Like when I listened after the record ends, I got up off my couch and I pulled it off pulled it off the table right away because you don't want to fuck your needle up.
right.
And
Yeah.
so that's crazy.
But that's just his vibe, man. Like that's why I really like working with that dude. You know, years later, when I was doing the original Uncommon Radio podcast, like, you know, he came out to Staten Island and like you know, we recorded a long form interview. Like he was really cool. And I hadn't, you know, seen him in years at that point. And whenever I would run into him back in the days, like, you know, post company flow, like he was always cool and just a good dude, man. Like he's definitely a guy that to be corny about it, like he's definitely got you root for. Like,
Yeah, for sure. There's
whenever he's making moves, he's one of those personalities. When he's making a move, it feels like you're making a move, and I don't even know him like that. You know what I mean? But I definitely am happy about when you see him online, like DJing at X, Y, or Z or whatever. Like that's really awesome, and he's a really accomplished DJ, and probably from that time period, probably the most professional DJ that I worked with, and taught me working with him taught me what that's supposed to look like in a studio. Um, I'll get into this a little bit. This is one more. It was one other thing that I wanted to hit is like, if you listen to the turntables on here, I think the best example is like "Bring It to Me." That's why I kind of feel like I recorded "Bring It to Me." Maybe they had recorded the vocals already or something, but I believe it's "Bring It to Me" where you can really hear this well, and it's on a lot of lens stuff. um, he would do, cuts from a turntable and basically leave fill spaces, and we would do two tracks almost all the time for him. And he would cut and leave a space on the three, and then cut and leave a space on the three, and then we'd go to the other track, and then he'd fill in the three and the four, and then let the one and two rock, and then fill in the three and the four. It wasn't always exactly like that, but it was basically this handoff between turntables, and it allowed him to do like these really creative things on record that he could replicate, with two turntables live, I'm sure, but there was no reason to do that in the studio. And so there's moments where like you can hear, and I remember Vessels would pan it a lot, and I would do that a lot when I would work with him later. Is like, you'd pan those tracks, like, so it felt like one turntable talking to the other, and you'd
right.
pan them a little bit, at like 10 and 2, and they would have this kind of rapport with each other. And there's one moment on the record where he cut something here, and then they both land, and then you hear the sample, like both land out of both, and then it goes back to here and here and here and here. And like, little things like that were things that I had not seen anyone else do, like in the studio. I'm sure other people, I can't even say that. I guess other people have done that, but Len was the first one I saw really take advantage of the magic of the studio to, you know, be a musician with the turntable instead of being a turntablist. Not that he wasn't not that he isn't a turntablist, but you know, he would like really use it as an instrument. Linda Tripp, which someday we'll get into as an episode, is a great example of what I'm talking about with his cuts.
Yeah, I mean, even on a song like End to End Burners, his
Yeah,
cuts are phenomenal.
yeah,
Like that's like I love that song just from a rap standpoint, but my favorite part of that song is his turntable work at the end. Like he kills that.
yeah, yeah.
So
It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, all of his turntable work is phenomenal, and he I used to say this a lot actually. I forgot that I remember thinking this. But he was one of the guys that I recorded as a DJ that made it look so easy. Like probably no one else I've ever met that DJs pre or post Ozone or Def Jux. I mean, he just knew exactly what to do. There was not a lot of retakes. If there was a retake, it was literally just because his hand didn't land where he wanted it to be. It wasn't because he was not doing what he wanted to do. It was just like
right.
a physical. If he bumped the fucking turntable by accident, it was like a physical problem. But like in terms of like what he wanted to do, if everything was aligned correctly and the table didn't jump or something, like it was just knock it out, knock it out, knock it out, knock it out. I mean, that was the easiest part of any session with him, was his turntable parts, because you knew that they were all going to go really quick, and that was it. And it was just, you're just bouncing on that D88 like from track to track, playing it back, do this, play it back, do this, and um but yeah, I mean, I wanted to shout him out on that part of it too, because that's a big part of this record, the turntablism on it. I don't understand why those hidden tracks, the one that's hidden on here and then the other one that's hidden on Spotify, I don't know why they never got like completed, because I recorded them, and I remember there was an intention, I guess, to either put cuts for the chorus or to have a chorus or to do some editing or whatever. And I guess for whatever reason, maybe they ran out of time from the due date, the deadline date, but that never happened. But those two songs, which are called, let me call it up here, because I do want to touch on that too. If my mouse would work, which it's not. Cool. Well, great. Oh, there it goes. It's like, the gift and the curse of the magic pad. It's like, it's one of those examples of technology that's great when it works and terrible when it doesn't work. So yeah, they're called EKI and This Little Funk of Mine. And again, those came out of just the camaraderie of the characters that were a part of this record, which was Len, Live, Jean, and Kice. And Kice, when I was recording this, I thought Kice was gonna have, a pretty large role on it myself, like I thought, but for whatever reason, like, Family Matters ended up being the song that made the record, and these other ones didn't. But we recorded a ton of stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if we recorded more than just those 3 songs with him during that week. I could be wrong, but that's part of like the mystery of this record for me, of me not remembering what I did and what I didn't do, because some of the stuff I remember distinctly doing didn't make the record on the official side of it. So, but it was good times, man. It was a lot of good times working on this album.
That's cool. Yeah, like we've been saying the whole episode, this is a phenomenal record, and if you haven't heard it, you need to go change that, especially if you're a fan of that era specifically. So
yeah, I mean, to not have this as part of your lexicon of records from that time period, that that sort of, it's almost like the lead up to not this album, but like the time period was sort of like just before Jux had started, but sort of after like Fondle 'Em had winded down, and Ruckus was sort of at the top in New York. If you're a fan of that time period, then this is a record you have to have heard. Like I said on other episodes, I don't like to use the word underrated, but if there is such an album that's underrated, it's this one. I mean, I can remember when Company Flow did sort of like the 3 of them actually reunited to do a show. I don't remember when it was. Probably like 10 years ago now. Maybe 6 or so years ago. It was like just before Run the Jewels had really started to pick up momentum, when there was talk of like Company Flow reuniting and doing tours and a new album and stuff. And they did a show, and I came down, and people I hadn't seen in years were really cool to me, and it was good to be there. I almost didn't go because it's weird to like see like your former employers, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's all music, you know what I mean? And it was all good, but it's like if you got invited to like a party at like whatever your regular last job was, you'd be like, oh, it'd be cool to see everybody, but man, it's gonna feel weird, but I'm gonna go. And that's ended up what it was. But the reason I bring that up is Jean Grae performed Taco Day at that reunion.
yeah, I've seen the video.
And the video that I'll probably link in the description below, just so that people could check that out, or I'll link it above here. And it was really cool. I mean, she was basically in costume and did the song.
She was in character, which is crazy.
And I couldn't tell whether, like, because as soon as I saw the way she was dressed, I knew what we were gonna. I was like, well, she's gonna do Taco Day. Like, it was no mystery to me. I don't know how much run that song on this album got, that it deserved, that it wasn't immediate for people at that show. Because this is years later. I mean, it's a long time after this album came out. So the heads that knew, and the heads that didn't, I guess. But I knew right away, and it was awesome to see that. I had never seen her perform that live. I don't know how many times she's performed. I don't know whether that's a regular staple for her or whether that's just something she brings out depending on the environment. But I had never seen her perform it live. So
either way, you know,
Yeah.
the song itself is crazy, you know, because, you know, it's 4 verses, almost 10
Mhm.
minutes. So the fact that she was able to do it live, it's just makes
Yeah.
it even more ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just not fair. It's totally unfair. But really dope.
So again, if you haven't heard it, go listen to it. And that goes for everything else that we've discussed up to this point. Festicons, anything company flow, because you know, they're, you know, we like to think that, you know, everyone's heard these things because, you know, we can sit here and talk about these albums for hours.
Mhm.
But you know, some people, they haven't heard these things, so it's never too late to go dig these up. And that's part of the fun is of music to me personally, especially as a collector and a listener, is digging and finding these things. So
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of why we're doing this show is, you know, to kind of just record some of the history as much as I can from my point of view and put people onto these records so that there's, you know, more of an understanding of how important these records are. It's really hard to define records unless you were there and lived through them. It doesn't, not just as a recording engineer, but even as a fan of the time. Like the further you
right.
get away from somebody who actually was going to Fat Beats or was actually listening to late night radio when Pity the Fool was made, like you don't, you know, the less relevance you get. So hopefully we can add some of that relevance. That being said, you know, make sure to remember subscribe to the channel. So Uncommon Records channel. This is one of many shows that we're putting together for this channel. We're pushing very close to 800 subscribers. Obviously, our goal is to get to 1,000 and just keep building from them. But right now, our goal is 800. So every single um, you know, subscription that we get gets us closer to that immediate goal, and that's like super important for us to get these stories out there and to raise awareness about what we're doing today as well. And you know, give a like to the video, share it, dig it up, and that's all we got. That's all we got for today. Peace, everybody.
Peace.